Awesome. Welcome back to our work. Today we get to talk to Jake Stika. Did I say that right?
More of a Stika.
Okay. Jake Stika from Next Gen Men. So, Jake, I just thought we would jump right in and have you kind of introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, folks. As mentioned, I'm with Next Gen Men. I'm the executive director and actually one of the co-founders. We turned 10 in November, which is pretty wild to say. But we're a nonprofit dedicated to building a future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. And in order to achieve that future, we need to change the way we see, act, and think about masculinity. And that looks a bunch of different ways with us. We work across youth, community, and workplace settings. Pre-pandemic, we used to run after-school youth programs. The demand was so high that we kind of moved up the food chain and do professional development and capacity building of educators and coaches and camp counselors and really support them so that they can meet young people where they're at in their communities. But we do some youth work currently still. Our director of programs, we're recording this in July here. He's out in the woods in Alberta, BC with 20 youth. And so we do that every summer. And then we also run a Discord server. So extremely offline all the way to extremely online. We're meeting the next generation of men where they're at. On the community side of things, we also host a podcast network. So shout out to the Next Gen Men Podcast Network. We've got great shows like Breaking the Boy Code. I personally love that show because we talk a lot about boys, but what's magical about that show is Jonathan has conversations with boys. And so you're hearing directly from 12, 13, 14-year-olds what's going on for them, which I think is pretty magical. We've got Masculinity with a hard K. They're always looking at things in community and society with a gendered lens. This week's episode that came out is the Fresh Prince episode. So, I think you and I are probably the same or similar vintage, and we grew up on Fresh Prince. So, good episode to look at. And then we've got Modern Manhood, which takes a look at kind of masculinity movements and what's going on. And that's a great show too. And then anyone who hablas español, we support a podcast called Oreja Peluda, where our amigo Danny has a Spanish language masculinities podcast. And then the last vertical that we have is our workplaces vertical. And I think that's probably where we'll sit in a lot of our conversation today. But that's called Equity Leaders, and we work in male dominant organizations. So oil and gas, mining, construction, those types of places, to better advance gender equity and mental health and broader diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Yeah, very cool. So when I was preparing for today, one of the big questions I really want to know is how did you find yourself doing this work 10 years ago?
Like all great things, by accident, I guess, but also through lived experience. Folks will watch on YouTube, but those on listening just to the podcast may not see. Like, I'm a tall, straight white male. Like, I have a lot of what we call privilege in our culture and society. And despite that, I really struggled with my mental health in my late teens and early 20s. At 19, I was really battling with my first bout of depression as I knew it. And well, actually, I probably didn't even know it at the time. I know it now. But my coping mechanisms were binge drinking and fist fights. And, I flunked out of the first university I went to. I was a varsity athlete and I couldn't play the one thing that I kind of designed my identity around. I recovered, transferred schools, made it back on the basketball team, came, Canadian all academic athlete, et cetera, et cetera. But 22, I'm hit with depression again, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Why is this happening? And at the time, my girlfriend was a women's studies grad, and my coping mechanism at 22 was self-harm, and that landed me in counseling and therapy. And I really came to understand this masculine script. You got to be tough. You should never show emotion. You shouldn't ask for help. And that was really my first major realization of it, and my I guess awakening. But simultaneously, while I was going through that, my best friend, who's one of my co-founders, unfortunately lost his 13-year-old brother to suicide in 2007. His brother was a young black man experiencing homophobic bullying, and so we worried that he was closeted, and that's what the path he chose for himself. And so Jamal losing his brother and my own struggles, I think also gave us a unique male friendship that a lot of men don't have, based on emotional support, vulnerability, care, connection, all those types of things. So so I mean, that was just the two of us young men trying to figure it out, coming of age. And then a few years later, I was working in the kind of the startup, early early stage venture capital space. He was working with at-risk youth, and I'd been fundraising for the Movember Foundation for 5 years, and they had a call for proposals for new ideas to change the face of men's health in Canada. So I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, here's this thing. Like, would you want to pitch something?" So we pitched this idea of a youth program, based on one that we read an article about. And they said, "Hey, we love you guys, but you need a bit more credibility." So in comes our third co-founder, Jason, who has a master's of science in public health, and is a specialist at research and evaluation. And bringing him on board, they gave us three knuckleheads some money for 2 years to start a youth program. And 2014, that was it. And we've just been going and growing since then.
Yeah. That's okay. That's a very powerful entry into this kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, like, to make it maybe a bit more meta as well too, in our culture and society, I think a lot of men don't think critically about gender or masculinity until it negatively impacts them, until they experience job loss, mental health crises, divorce, and then they're left with, why is this happening? What is the root of this? Why am I feeling this way? Why can't I bounce back? And one of the, I think, the only positive transitions for men into thinking critically about gender is that transition to fatherhood, where someone hands them a tiny human being and says, "Here, program this." And, if it's a girl, there's the joke of, "I got to go polish the shotgun for when the boys come for her." And that's such a strong indicator of men knowing how problematic boy culture is, but rather than changing boy culture, they would just rather protect their daughter. And then on the flip side, if it's a boy, they either say, "Well, I hope he makes it," or, "I'm going to toughen him up and make sure he does."
Yeah. Yeah. As a parent right now, yeah, it's so true. And it's so like, for me, I I was on kind of on the other end of the spectrum. I always had this high level of sensitivity to things like gender expectations and norms and limitations. And for the longest time, I thought that was growing up in a traditional Indian household where roles are very defined and very any like no equality there or equity there, I should say. But as like more recently over the last 5 or 10 years, as I've been working more on the women's side of the gender issue, which is the same issue, but slightly different perspective or approach. But I've realized this isn't unique to Indian households. This isn't unique to one culture. This is really the human experience about what you're saying with protect our little girls and our use our boys as mechanisms to do that. It's this vicious cycle.
Well, let's just name the villain here. It's patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
And patriarchy, as a class, benefits men, right? Like, when we look at roles of leadership in government, in corporations, in religious institutions, like, patriarchy still benefits men on a broad scale. But the flip side of that is those men who rise to the top of patriarchy pay a deep individual price around being disconnected from their mental, emotional, spiritual connections to themselves and human beings around them, because patriarchy is a culture of competition and domination. And yourself as a young girl growing up in an Indian household, right? There's cultural connotations, but there's gender connotations. And, when you're told, like, this is why men only start to think critically about gender, because for the most part, it benefits us through our lives until we run into that wall. But if you're a girl, it's like, no, you can't do that. Boys do that. You can't do this. You have to do this. This is your role. And you're left being like, what? Why? Right? You're questioning your whole life. Why? Because you're on the short end of the stick. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, it's always useful to name patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah, when you responded to my email as we're scheduling today, and your response was, "Yeah, let's take down the patriarchy together," and through a conversation, I had a good chuckle, and I also, like, I've also always, like, I've lived it, and I've really been working from a corporate perspective, and now from a industry perspective here locally through the associations that I'm a part of. Like, I've really just been kinda educating myself as I go and really drawing upon my own experience, right? But what I find at the core of it, through at the beginning of the process and now 10 years kind of into this process, I always felt that way, is the patriarchy is the issue. And it's reaffirming that from your perspective, with all of the work that you do and all of the education that you have on this topic, that your perspective is the same. And yeah.
Well, there's this really great book. You may recognize the name Bell Hooks. She's this really well-known Black feminist author, and she wrote a book called Will to Change on men, masculinity, and love. And I'll paraphrase, but I read this quote after I started Next Gen Men, but for me, it really solidified why it is what we do. And she says the first act of violence that patriarchy asks of men is not that against women. It's that against themselves. And should they fail to psychologically and emotionally cripple themselves, they'll be met by a group of men that will do it for them. And, that just hit me because, yeah, early in my life, I had all these messages. Myself, when I talk about this work, I call them the paper cuts of patriarchy. It's over a lifetime of like, boys are blue, boys don't cry, man up, push through, right? Like those are all moments in your life that you get the message of what this system, this culture is asking of you. And you emotionally disconnect. You're not in touch with your authentic self as a child into adulthood. And then if you somehow fail to do that, if you somehow maintain your emotions, your vulnerability, those types of things, the statistics of boys in middle school experiencing assault, and like I was in fistfights in middle school, I wasn't, because the culture pushes it out of you, beats it out of you, essentially. So you just succumb to it, right? And then when you are so emotionally and mentally disconnected from yourself, and there's gender inequality and all these types of things, like it really underpins a lot of issues in our society and culture. And so yeah, it's absolutely that. And I think the important thing, I'm not saying this is a critique, because I think I said it myself in this conversation, but sometimes we say the patriarchy as if there was like a round table with a bunch of like hooded individuals with a plan. Like it's just a culture and a system that's built up over a long period of time, much like capitalism or the things that we exist within, and it impacts all of us. Like we're all deeply impacted by it. And the important thing to note as well too is it's not just men who uphold patriarchy, it's women. When I hear with guys on dating apps, and they're like, oh, I can't, there's all these profiles that say 6 feet, 6 figures, six pack, right? And it's like reinforcing your worth as a man is your height, what you make, and how fit you are, right? And then I had a buddy who ran a sock company, and I helped him do like a Christmas market once. And this little boy ran up and saw these socks, and they were teal and purple and orange, and they had these shapes on them. And he turned to his mom excitedly, and she says, "No, those are girl socks," right? And so, I think it's just really important to say this is a system and a culture, and we're all impacted by it, and we all play roles in either dismantling it or reinforcing.
Yeah, for sure. So on that, like, this is a bit of a two-part question, but it goes to the roles, or what we call or what we think of as masculine and feminine roles and traits. And I think we all kind of have a definition in our head of what what roles we're comfortable on the feminine side and the masculine side. And my question really is why do we have that high level of comfort with like and this is my perception of it, but I'll tie this back to something. So my perception of is we're really comfortable with our women being supporters, being nurturers, holding space for the relationships and the children that they have in their life. We're really comfortable with them, really, yeah, kind of that support, holding space role. With our men, we're really comfortable with them being ambitious, um, I don't want to say aggressive, but maybe competitive. We're really comfortable with them being protectors and providers, right? That's my definition of what I think are kind of those high level traditional masculine feminine roles. But I was having a conversation with a girlfriend yesterday, and her and I are really fortunate. We were kind of sharing a little bit of love for our partners who are really, really involved fathers. And she said to me, she said, I think that is actually the most masculine trait that a man can have is nurturing and caring for these little kids. And I thought, yeah, that feels very true, but it wouldn't have been the one that I think of. So my first question for you, Jake, is what do you view as those very strong masculine and feminine traits or roles?
So, if you asked me what the expectations are and what everything points to, I would say the same as you, right? Like we actually run a workshop. It's a gender norms workshop where we usually it's rounds or folks sitting at a table, and we'll give them 2 sheets of paper and we ask them, here, draw like basically like a picture frame, right? And inside the container, what toys should boys play with, what jobs should men have, how should they dress, how should they behave in relationships, right? We just ask those questions, and literally the word should, and people just slide into it, right? And at the end of it, we're asking, hey, this table, did you copy that table? And they're like, no. And it's like, how do we all know these things, right? We absorb them through our culture, our media, those types of things, right? So, like, I don't think it's necessarily wrong to hold those beliefs or to have arrived at that outcome. The reality is it useful, right? And if I, was supreme ruler of the world, democratically elected, of course, I would do away with masculine and feminine. These are all human traits that we can all embody, right? Because the unfortunate weight that we carry with, if leadership, I'm using air quotes here for the people on the podcast, but if leadership, air quotes, is masculine, and then we tell women to have executive presence and show up a certain way and be more masculine, unfortunately the natural socialization, because we all see it as such, will be that women are inferior in that sense, no matter how hard they try. And then on the flip side of that, if we say that nurturing and caregiving and those types of things are traditionally, air quotes, feminine traits, men will be like continuously feel, oh, you're babysitting your kids today? No, I'm parenting them, right? Like the more we keep codifying things as masculine or feminine, the more we keep, the entrenchment of this. That being said, I don't know that we're anywhere near a society and culture where, we can just abandon gender altogether. Although, like, fist up for non-binary and trans people pushing the envelope and just saying no, like I can move through these labels and I don't even need to have labels. Like, I find that so inspiring and strong as well too. But for me, it's like, how do we, we used to say redefining masculinity, and people would say, oh, great, like, what's the new definition? And then we really realized it's not redefining, it's undefining, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do we make it so that, a big buff jock and a male ballet dancer are both valued and upheld ideals of masculinity, because they are, right? Like they're those things. And but if we have to deal with what we have to deal with, yeah, I recently heard a discussion, and I wish I could credit it, but I'm still thinking about it, so I'll name it because I think it's interesting. If, as a man, our role is to be a protector and a provider, both of those things actually mean safety. And so, therefore, and as I'm saying this, I know who to credit: Dr. Brendan Kwiatkowski. He's at Remasculine on Instagram, so go check him out. But he said, protector provider equals safety. So, therefore, the most masculine thing we can do is be safe to others, be safe to ourselves. And what that means, if you put it in a relationship context, right? Like, how are you safe to your partner? Put it in a workplace concept. How are you safe to the people that you have the honor and privilege of leading? Put it into a community perspective. How are you safe to your friends at the pub and the difficult things that they're going through in their lives? So I really like that reframe of protector provider equals safety. How are you safe?
I really like that as well. Yeah.
So shout out to Brendan.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll have to follow him and check some of that stuff out. And it really, like, and as you're talking about it, right? If it's a patriarchy and it's really systems and norms that have kind of been developed over time, there is an ease to the traditional way, if you want to call it, right? Um, right now, my husband and I, if we have a sick kid, we sit there with our calendars and kind of figure out who it makes the most sense for in that day, which is a much more cumbersome process and requires a little bit more communication and problem solving than the default parent staying home with the sick kid, right?
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely. And I mean, what I like, so one of Next Gen Men's values is empathy, and it's baked into our vision statement, of future where boys and men feel less pain and cause less harm. So we lead with empathy for the pain and harm that boys experience, and then we follow with accountability for the harms that they cause. But when empathy is one of our values, one thing that we also say is hard on systems, soft on people, because us as people are products of these systems, these cultures, these structures, these norms, right? So, for me to sit here and villainize someone for these are the things that you believe, and those types of things, like, I'll hold them accountable and say you can change what you believe, but how you ended up there, I understand.
yeah. Yeah. I love that. Tough on systems, safety as a new definition of masculinity. Like, this is all gold. Like, it's such a it's the world we live in, but that slight reframe changes everything around it. Yeah. I like
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I think make the invisible visible, and help people think and see differently. And I couldn't have done this 10 years ago. This is daily learning and unlearning, and if anything that I can do is remember the knucklehead that I was and the lessons I've learned along the way, and can I help accelerate it for someone else?
Very cool. So you talked a little bit about some of the work you do in business or the corporate space around, and it sounds like you're primarily working with organizations that are male led or male dominant. Fair? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
what I guess what are the things that these organizations are doing well as a whole from a EDI or inclusivity perspective?
Yeah. So, like, full transparency, I actually really like working with organizations that are more male dominant. And I'll explain what that means. So, sometimes we find ourselves working in, like, let's say tech or finance or something like that. And they'll say, oh, we have, 35% women, 45% women. Like, we're not doing so bad here, but they don't look at where women are in the hierarchy or what department is female dominant. They just look at their overall numbers, right? And you still look at their board, and it's predominantly older white men, and you look at their leadership and the pathway to there, like, um, those organizations are very frustrating to me because it's very performative, right? And then sometimes we go and we work with a construction company, and they're like, we're 96% male and 4% female. And they have nowhere to hide. And I love that because they know where they're at. And the the reality is, if they're coming to us and they're having that conversation, they're open to changing that. And sometimes they start from the place of, well, we're at 4% women and we need to get to like 10%. But that's like doubling your numbers. Where are those women going to come from? Like, you know, and
Yeah.
so what we always help them kind of shift the mentality on is, okay, so you've got this 96% group and that's male. How do we actually work with them? Because if we work with the dominant narrative and help them create a more conducive environment, the diversity is going to follow one way or another. And, you know, again, like folks will hire us to say, hey, we need to engage men to make the space better for women. But our starting point is often men treat other men like crap here. Until we fix that, that nobody else is going to thrive here, because the men on the short end of the stick will then just turn around and do it to someone else with less, quote unquote, less power. And uh, you know, that's been, I think, a really good reframe for us for a lot of the organizations, and we're seeing a lot of you know, progress. And we say male dominant, not male dominated, because we're acknowledging that there is more men, but just because there's more men, the way that men show up doesn't have to be the way that the organization is. So that's kind of maybe a bit of our approach. And then what are they doing well? I mean, at the end of the day, especially in 2024, the things that are going to matter more and more is the human aspect of it, right? Like AI is here. We've seen the power of it, right? In some of these male dominant industries, whether that's, you know, oil and gas, mining, those types of things, like, yeah, there's going to need to be operators, but those machines get better year over year, right? And so the one thing that you as a workplace can control for is the human beings and how they show up. And I think any initiative, you know, whether we call it DEI or culture or, you know, psychological safety or, you know, we try to be really responsive to where organizations are coming from in their journey, and matching some of that language. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is work with humans to work with other humans and make the human experience better within this organization. And I think when you look at it that way, EDI, DEI, whatever is good and is helping on that front. Sometimes we complicate it and we really put these like academic or activist structures on it, and they're good to understand the issue, but they're not great at like moving the needle and connecting with people. And I think one of the biggest things that we see is, you know, sometimes we're in the office towers in a boardroom on the 17th floor with folks with master's degree educations who are, you know, plugged into media and are on LinkedIn and all those types of things. And we're having one conversation about DEI. And then we go out in the field, the mine site, the, you know, the shop, and those people are just exposed to different things. It's not a less than, better than. It's, you know, in certain ways those people are, you know, hunting, they're you know, care about their sports team, like just the issues that they're connected and plugged into are different. And what's happening in the boardroom is not translating to what's happening in the shop. But again, if you take that step back and you make it less of an academic exercise and you make it more about the humans in the room and how they connect and how they support one another, there's a lot of potential there, regardless of the setting.
Yeah, for sure. That's such a big gap. I think any type of change management talks about really meeting people where they're at. And I think that that is a huge issue from an EDI perspective. I see in at least our organization and the industry is we're talking about the what like even just from a perspective of selling it and saying, hey, this is why we're rolling out this program and this is why we're having this conversation, or building some education and awareness around this topic. Even when we're plugging the why, I find, first of all, a lot of folks in that shop don't necessarily think that we have a problem because the work's getting done and it's getting done well, and maybe the mental health or how everybody's well-being is and how they're doing is not necessarily on the radar. That's one issue. But the other, like when we're saying, okay, well, better decision making or more diverse opinions at a boardroom table will improve the profitability. None of my operators, my field crews really care about that. That's not, we're not meeting them where they're at. That's not a notion that's important to them, right? But when we talk about, and that's what I think is so powerful about a lot of the work that you guys do, is talk about the impact on people's lives and well-being and things like suicide rates, addiction. These are things that everybody can understand and want to work towards versus an extra percentage point on profitability, right? Like I think just delivering how that why and how is communicated, I think is really, really important. And the other, I just want to add the what I've seen, and this is a little plug for Next Gen Men, is I find if your inclusivity committee is made up of just women and it's the 4 women in senior positions across the organization, um, inherently you're not getting all of the different perspectives around the table, but there also is people aren't going to receive, again, meeting a group of men where they're at, because that is primarily who we have doing the work, or our crews and our fields and even our managers, like they're all primarily men. We want to meet them where they're at. It helps to have a man having that conversation and sharing his perspective, because then you can relate, and in that perspective or representation, you can relate better. The stories connect on a different level, and I know that when you came and spoke at the organization I work for, it was how seen all of the men felt and how a part of the inclusivity journey that they became, like all of a sudden they were in it with us, whereas there always was a little bit of separation between the men and the women up until your conversation. So that's something any business leader or team leader out there that's listening, I would say give Next Gen Men or an organization like that a phone call, because I think hearing it from a man is very important.
I'm going to clip that as a testimonial.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. Like when we think of it as a cerebral activity, and we say that diversity matters, it goes both ways. Diversity matters in the field and in the shop, in getting, like there's a burden of emotional labor, but we know that women are socialized to be more caring and nurturing. You put more women out in the field, safety performance improves because there's someone there who is caring and connected about that. My partner is a Red Seal tradeswoman, and she takes safety very seriously in her workplace environment. And she works with a bunch of men, right? And they benefit from that care there. And I do want to name that obviously there's some emotional labor there. She gets, an extra $2 an hour. So maybe it's a little compensated there. But on the flip side of that, having a man in your DEI committee or inclusion structure or those types of things, that structure also benefits then from the diversity, because that is someone who can name, hey, this population is socialized maybe this way, or those types of things. And I love working with all the amazing people that I do, but like 90% of them are women, right? And it's a specific way of looking at the world. And one thing that I think is really important to dispel is there's a lot of guys that feel like, oh, like women hate men, and they don't care for us, etc. But like working with these female champions of like DEI and whatnot, like they care so much. They're just struggling to find a way to connect. And when I finish a talk, and this was true at your organization well too, like the hands that go up are women as a mother to a boy, as a partner to a man. Women love men. They want us to thrive and be connected. And so, yeah, I think the diversity definitely goes both ways.
And that is kind of a symptom of so much focus on women over the last period of time. Have we overcorrected and as a result created more of a divide? Has that been a symptom of the work done in the women's space?
Uh, yes, and I mean, I think there's still so much progress to be made for gender equity. Like, globally, women are 51% of the population. You look at, female heads of state, it's like 11%. You look at the Fortune 500, like, the companies that drive capitalism forward, and, 10.4% of them have female CEOs. Like, there's still so much progress to be made towards a gender equal world. But, in certain ways, I think that we have left boys and men out of that conversation as well, and maybe seen them as more of a problem than as part of the solution. And I think what a great example would be, and okay, let's name another villain in this: capitalism, right? Because, when we push women into science, technology, engineering, math, as those are male dominant fields, the reason for that isn't necessarily gender inequality. It's because that's where the income is, right? Like, that's where we want to give women economic security and whatnot. And that shows me how much capitalism drives the gender equality conversation. Because if we actually were having a true just gender equality conversation, we would then also say, okay, well, we need other balancing measures to get men into healthcare, education, arts, literacy, because that would then actually balance what it is we're doing. But because the incomes aren't there and we don't value it, we're not having that two-sided conversation. And so that's, I think, a little bit of evidence to what you were saying, but that doesn't mean that also means that there's tremendous opportunity, right? Like, how do we get them into those spaces? And the sad thing is that inevitably, if men enter health, education, arts, literacy, wages will go up in those spaces as well too.
Right. Yeah, of course. Um, when so we're talking, like, a lot of the conversation we've had so far about EDI efforts, it's focused on an organization as a whole. What about a singular leader? And throughout my podcast, I've realized I'm kind of using the term leader. It's not always a leader of an organization. Like, you're a leader in the space that you hold at home and at work, right? But so whether it's a team of 10 or an organization, as a leader, what are some of the things that you can do to create a more inclusive or safe environment around you?
Yeah. And I love, like, the flexibility of leadership. Like, leadership isn't just a title, right? Especially, you look at a lot of organizations and how people end up in leadership. It's just because you were the best at the position beneath the one that you did, and then we promote you. And, leading people and doing your job well are two totally different skill sets, right? So you can lead from anywhere, and, you know, quite frankly, like, if you're a charismatic, likable person who can make people laugh, you have leadership qualities, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that it's not just a title. But from that perspective, I think, you know, um, some of these traditional notions of what quote unquote leadership looks like, we need to dispel that. And leadership is empathy. Leadership is care. Leadership is humility. Leadership is reflection, right? Like, all those types of things. And so I think the more someone can show up with curiosity and, wanting to connect and wanting to understand, like, obviously, we have our KPIs, OKRs, whatever acronym you're responsible for as a leader and whatnot. But what is motivating the people that you lead and are connected with? Where are they coming from? What potentially are they struggling with? And um, again, not to say that Next Gen Men or whatever is the be all end all, but I just had a really positive experience earlier this week. One of our youth program coordinators is Muslim. He took a day off earlier this week because it's a specific time of year that they're celebrating, and he came to our team meeting, and he shared about what was going on for him, and why it mattered, and we all learned a little bit, and it was just like a huge nothing burger. And the fact that it was a huge nothing burger, to me, felt like a tremendous success, because we didn't need to make a show of it. We didn't need to whatever. It was just sharing, caring, connecting, and you know uh, this may come off as controversial, but, like, maybe we don't need to make such big deals down the road of, like, International Women's Day or Women's History Month or Black History Month or those types of things, because we don't just need the day to do it. We always celebrate it. We're always curious. We are always trying to better understand where people are coming from in their history, right? Because, again, my hot take that people can come at me for is, do people of those identities want the day celebrated, or do they want it just to be seamless, that they include and belong and don't have barriers? Like, I think that's the end outcome that we're working towards, not that our calendar is so full of these days, right? And so, a really long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's like, as a leader, reflecting on what is the journey and what do we need to get there, and acknowledging that we all have a lot of learning and unlearning to go, and like, we're going to make mistakes, and I, doing this work, still put my foot in my mouth, and then I apologize and I say I can do better, and I go read a book, or I listen to a podcast, or I try to find a different perspective. It's a journey, not a destination.
So I think like you're talking about really being curious and kind of creating space for whatever the human experience is around you as a leader. That's kind of paraphrasing, I think, a little bit of what I how I understood that. And that's why, and you and I have had this conversation previously, is the next thing I want to focus on with my team is that psychological safety piece. And that really, in order to kind of create that safe space to have those conversations. So regardless, like, it doesn't necessarily need to be focused around, say, mental health or gender or faith. It's really, how do you create the space for, regardless of what that person's human experience is, they can come approach you and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, and just to illustrate maybe an example of how we've tried to approach that, one kind of mantra that we use is moving from compliance to care. And I think the tough
Mm.
part is that a lot of male dominant industries, especially, have very strong compliance cultures because they've had to do that with their safety rail. And they should, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't quite work in the psychological safety space, because if you're from a compliance culture on psychological safety, you're asking, tell me the things I can say and tell me the things I can't say. Tell me, when it comes to gender, this is the point of view that I need to have. When it comes to race, this is the point of view I need to have, right? But when we can move from compliance to care, it doesn't matter what the issue is. You're there because you care about the other person, and you care about your team, and you care about how we as people show up together. And so, we bake that into a lot of our workshops and activities and those types of things. But for example, we run, it's on hiatus this summer, but we run a book club, and book is an acronym, BOOK, Beyond Our Own Knowledge. And every quarter I choose a book, and we don't tell people the book in advance. I choose a book, and sometimes it's race, sometimes it's religion, sometimes it's gender, sometimes it's disability. And the magic of not telling them the book is they're signing up and saying, I want to be an inclusive leader no matter what. Not, oh, trans stuff is in the news right now and I need to learn about trans people. Maybe that's an okay reaction as well too, but if you just lay a really broad groundwork of like different human experiences, you're going to show up and be prepared whatever someone tells you, because you have the flexibility and just understand that the diversity of human beings, and not just your own lived experience or the people who are closest to you, who chances are look like you, and their experiences. So no, I think, I would just say that, psychological safety is moving from compliance to care, and being ready to be, as we said earlier, be safe for other people.
And something you came up, if we're moving, if organizations, not if, you need to, as an organization, move from compliance to care, and do it in a way that you're obviously meeting all your regulatory requirements, et cetera, and keeping people physically safe. Like that, that's not even a question. But we also then have to talk about the leaders that we're promoting, right? You mentioned briefly that typically the person who's best at doing the technical skill or the task is the person that gets promoted to lead the team of the people doing the technical skill or the task. But as a whole, I think one of the big errors that organizations make is that person that we're promoting either A, doesn't want to lead in this when we talk about leadership as safety and care, from that lens, that might not be what they want to do, or that might not be an area that they're proficient and can hold space for, right? I think that as the organize as we understand these principles better, we also have to then look at the leaders that we're promoting and ensuring that if they don't have those skills or capabilities, that we're supporting them and developing them.
Well, I think, we come into organizations and we literally tell people, like, you're brilliant engineers. You've got an MBA. You're like amazing in what you do. Chances are, when you went to school, diversity, equity, inclusion, culture, belonging, like, you didn't take classes in those because those are new emergent things that we're being responsive to. And as organizations, we're now saying you need to lead these ways. That's unfair. We need to give people the support and the skills and the know-how in how to show up that way.
Right. Yeah. I like that. Absolutely. And so I think, you guys do a lot of work with youth. My first question really is how are young people as a whole doing right now? You hear a lot, or at least you see the headlines and the articles about the post-COVID effect and really the spillover from that. But as a whole, from your perspective, how are our young people doing?
Not good. um, yeah, my heart goes out to them because the world they're inheriting feels precarious, right? Like, you look at the news and you see more war than there ever was. Politics feels fraught. You're hearing about how maybe your parents or people in and around that generation can't afford housing. Climate emergency. Like, there's a lot to induce anxiety and stress for young people. Not to mention, constant connection of being online. Like, I think about my own upbringing and, maybe there was some bullying or teasing at school, but I went home and it didn't follow me. Right. And now, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever the cool kids are on these days, like, it follows you. So I have a deep, deep well of empathy for young people today. That being said, they're the future. They're going to change the world for us. And so how do we support them? How do we help them get through this? And in certain ways, like, they're so much better off, right? Like, the youth that we now work with in our youth programs are 20 years younger than me. And I think about what I was at their age. I went to a Catholic high school. Nobody was out. If I thought of a trans individual, I probably would have used a slur, and feminism had never crossed my mind. This generation knows all those things and more.
Yeah.
And so, they have a lot of potential. And a lot of us are fighting about them, right? Like, you look at some of those really hypercharged, like, school council meetings and those types of things, but, like, I think what we need to do, it's like a little bit of a flippant statement for me, and I was like, but I really do think if all of us stopped wringing our hands about kids and we just went and befriended an 11-year-old and, like, poured our care and connection into them, the kids would be all right. Like, we need more people stepping into coaching, stepping into after school programs, those types of things. And the tough part is it's not even just on the people and their apathy. Like, again, naming the villain of capitalism. Everything's expensive now. You need to work, you need to grind, you need to hustle, you need to all these things, right? And then, the media, like, you come home, you sit on Netflix and all those types of things. But it's just, I think anything that we can do to get into proximity to young people and show them that we care about them is a good thing.
When you talk a lot about that, I have a little almost 4-year-old that I try to pour the right care and the right connection into every single day. What advice do you have as parents of these little boys and these little girls? Like, how do we make sure that these systems and norms of patriarchy and capitalism, the good and the bad, right? Like, there's both sides of it, but how do we make sure that this next generation of young people has the tools to navigate this with more ease?
Yeah. Rachel Giza wrote this in her book, Boys, What It Means to Become a Man. And I'm also paraphrasing here a little bit, but it's essentially something like, we've done a great job of telling our daughters they can do anything boys can do, but we've done a shit job of telling our sons they can do anything girls can do. And if we really believe in gender equality, that needs to be more balanced. right? And the problem is when we're pushing on kind of one side of the equation, that we're setting ourselves up for backlash or those types of things. So how do we just support their whole development as human beings, not just what we think of them as a girl or as a boy or how society will think of them. um, I think that that's really important. And I think it's just really important for us as adults. Like, I grew up with my parents, not necessarily like my parents did the best they could, but I didn't grow up with them necessarily apologizing to me or showing me that they can make mistakes too or whatever. Like, I think it's really important to role model to our kids today, like, hey, I said something I didn't mean to. I'm really sorry about that. Or, reacting to something and then coming back to them the next day and being like, I don't think that I handled that very well. Can we have a do-over?
Mm.
I think, those types of examples really set them up to be those curious, caring, connected leaders and individuals that we so desperately want in our culture and society.
Showing them our humanness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our ability to grow.
I'm just thinking a little bit about your comment about this generation of young people. I was fortunate enough to teach a class on campus a couple years ago now. And what I thought was so powerful, like I feel like this next generation of young people, and that would have been like 19, 20, 21 year olds. It was a fourth year strategy class. And they're going to change the world for two reasons. One, they genuinely seem to care about each other. There was less cliques and divides than what I recall when I went through university and high school. That was apparent in this particular class, anyways. And the other thing is they question everything. They don't take anything at face value, and we don't do anything just because we've always done it that way. We need to understand the why and question it and really just like challenging the status quo. I think inherently we're going to see some change.
I mean, I'm smiling because going back to what I said earlier of like, the anxiety of like, you can't afford a home, climate crisis, jobs are being eaten up by AI, et cetera, et cetera. If you go to a young person, you say, well, this is the way things are. Why wouldn't they say why? It seems like it's not working,
Yeah.
right? And so I think there's so much inspiration and learning that we can also take from young people.
Yeah, for sure. We didn't question it as much.
It seemed to work at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Awesome, Jake. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on?
No, I'm really grateful for the conversation and the thoughtful questions, and I obviously love talking about what we do. So if folks want to learn more, they can check us out at nextgenmen.ca or at nextgenmen on the socials, and we also send a newsletter out, which you can find at thefutureofmasculinity.com.
Awesome. Yeah. I think one of the coolest part about this podcast so far is getting to have these conversations with people that are really doing exceptional work, and this space where their skills and talents or passions align with their capabilities. Like, I feel like, yeah, I believe so strongly in what Next Gen Men does and the work that you do, Jake. And I'm just so thankful that you could be here today. Also, there's about 30-40% of my audience that resides here in Saskatoon. So I did want to mention that coming up on Thursday, September 26th, Jake will be in Saskatoon. He'll be delivering his Male Allies keynote at Prairieland Park at an event called Con Expo. It's hosted by the local construction association, but they are actually selling tickets for Jake's talk for $25 to attend for anybody, whether you're in the industry or not. So you don't need to be a member. You don't necessarily need to be into the industry. It's a breakfast event that day on Thursday, September 26th. So I just wanted to make sure everybody is aware of that. Jake, I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time and coming to chat with me.
Thank you so much. I hope folks come out, and that's actually my first time in Saskatoon, so I'm excited.
Yeah. And it's good it's September and not February. We'll leave it at that.
Fair.
So thank you.